So Jamie is the instructor for this first chunk, and we have the same a subgroup of helpers that we had last time: myself, Christian, Gino, Eves, and Lee. We're going to try something slightly different, but this isn't a hard and fast rule. But if you have a question that's sort of related to R or running into some challenges with your environment, if you could post that in Etherpad, and I'll have a little section for questions. We just wanted it there so we had a record of it so it could help others in the future. So the chat in Zoom is kind of ephemeral. But anyway, if you post something in Zoom, we'll find it either way. So don't feel like you have to, this is not a strict rule on any of this, but if you happen to remember, post it in the Etherpad. So with that, Jamie.
Hey, like Christian said, we are working with the dplyr package, and within dplyr, we're going to go through some functions that you're going to be using to sift and sort your data. I'm going to switch over to my desktop, and I want to find out if you guys can see it okay. So hang on just a second here. I'm going to share my screen. And okay. Can everybody, oops, that's not the right one. Sorry about that. I'm trying to grab my RStudio. Okay, share screen, and where's my RStudio? Come on, RStudio. No, that's not. Well, that's embarrassing. I'm trying to find my this should be RStudio. No, that's not it. That's not it. Oh, come on. Okay, here we go. All right, can everybody, looking on the upper right, can you read the text comfortably? And I guess put a note in the chat, or one of the, or note, okay. Now the first, let's see, last lesson, we talked about installing dplyr and gapminder. And so we will need to load those two libraries today. If you look in the upper right where it says library dplyr and library gapminder, those are the two commands we're going to run to work with this morning's lesson. So I'm going to run those now. I'm going to select the two of them and just click run. And as you see in your console, basically those two, because they're installed, they just show, it just repeats the command down below. If you don't get that response, the helpers will go over with you how to install those two packages. So everybody has those? Okay. The very first function we're going to go over is the select function. And I want to show you a graphic of it. Come on. Okay, oops. I lost my, okay. The select function will take your data, and it's the same as if you've ever used a SQL or one of those, something like that. You're gonna select specific columns from your data and just view those in a different, either in a different data set or on your terminal, okay? So you're gonna pull out just specific columns.
So,
yes,
Jamie, could you show an example of maybe what the?
Oh,
I don't see the graphic. If you were.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm seeing it. Let me. Oh, great. Okay, I see it on my screen. So let me switch what I'm stop the share and see if I can. Let's see. Okay, can you see that now?
Nope.
No. Okay.
Jamie, you would have to do a new share.
Yeah, okay, let me get out of this share and I'll do another one. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm gonna share this one. Okay, can you see where it says the select?
Yep.
Okay, so you basically the select function, you take your data set and you're pulling out specific, like in this case it says column A, column C, and you're gonna make yourself a new data set using those particular columns. So you're acting on columns here. Okay, I'm gonna go back to RStudio and see, type that.
So just really quickly, this is particularly handy if, this is the case for a lot of data sets that you can find, either publicly available data sets, like I've downloaded government data before, and often these data sets have 35 columns of information, but the ones that I really want are actually maybe like 2 or 3 of the columns. And so I can pull out those columns and then do whatever data analysis I want to do from there.
Okay, so this is the syntax. You're gonna say select, and our particular data set is called Gapminder. And after this, you're gonna type the columns you wanna work with. In our case, we're gonna look at the year, the country, and the GDP, and also the life expectancy. We're gonna use some of these columns later. So after typing in the data set you wanna do this, you wanna act on, I'm gonna type year, country, GDP per cap, and life expectancy. If I run the command like, and of course I have a typo here. If I run the command like this, it's gonna throw the output into the console. And so in order to be able to continue to use this, I'm gonna first, even though this is the correct syntax used here, I'm gonna create a new data set that we can work on. So if you wanna read the output of this function into a data set instead of the console, what you do is, okay, sorry, I just saw a message in there. I'm gonna call this new data set year, country, GDP. You wanna give it a nice, easy title to remember. Year, country, GDP. And then now I'm gonna use the assignment operator, which is this, okay? So at this point, we're gonna create a new data set using select and reading in Gapminder. So I'm gonna run that one. Oops. Ah. See, I make all my typos when everybody's watching. Okay, now you see in your console, it's run this. There's a couple ways you can look at it. Now, do you remember last week we talked about the view command where you type capital view and then the data set you just created, which is in this case is year, country. Okay, you see, if you see my screen, there's a little blue box opens up. That it's kind of like finishing the command for you. Once you see that, you can use your tab and it'll finish the command. This is one way to view the data set you just created. Now, if you can look in the upper right of your of RStudio, that's another way. You'll see within the global environment, the data set that you've just created is there. It says it's a little bit squeezed, but there's a couple ways you can look at it. So you can see we now have a new data set called year, country, GDP, and the columns are year, country, GDP per capita, and life expectancy. So we've got we've got this new data set. Actually, let me copy this up here. Okay. So we have this new data set that we can do some work on. One of the things about dplyr, which makes it so helpful, is we can use a thing called a pipe. Now, if you're a Unix user, you've probably heard that term. If you're not, the idea of a pipe is you're taking data from one, you might say, you're taking a data set and you're pouring it through a pipe into other functions. So you don't have to say, make a data set, act on it, and then make another one. You can just actually, what I'm going to show you is we're gonna be using pipe, we're gonna build a stack of functions, and we're gonna do them one at a time, so it isn't, I hope it won't be too unusual looking. So we now have this new, now that we have this new, this new data set, it'd be great if we can actually sort it, if you can add a column and you can do different things. So the next function we're going to look at And has everybody already made this new data set, year, country, GDP? You guys are, okay.
Type into the chat or something if
If you're kind of caught up with this.
Yeah. That helps us know like who's following, who's not following. That'd be great.
Okay, now I'm assuming we've all got at least year, country, GDP. So it would be really handy to be able to sort your data once you get this. So what I'm going to do now is show you the stacking of functions. If you're going to be stacking, now you can basically say we're going to you could actually use the same year, country, GDP, or you can make a new one, say year, country, GDP, sorted. But you have that option of either making a new one or writing over the one you've just made. So this is going to be, in this case, we're going to use select and arrange. And arrange, I know it doesn't sound like sort, but arrange is what we use to sort the data. So we're going to start out by reading in, just let me move my cheat notes. So, okay, here. So we're going to say, we're going to read in, the first thing we're going to read in is Gapminder. Again. And after Gapminder, you're going to use the pipe command if you want to send Gapminder through, say, select, arrange, and any other functions. So we're not unlike the way we did before, because all of the functions I'm showing you, they could be used alone or stacked together. Okay, so Gapminder, I'm going to pipe it through the first function. So the pipe command, and there's a couple ways you can do this. You can do Control, Shift, or Command, Shift, and M, depending on whether you have a Mac or Windows. And it makes that weird little %, %. So this is the first step. We're going to take Gapminder and we're going to pipe it through some functions. Oops. Oh, sorry, typo there. Enter. Okay. So the first one I'm going to, the first thing I'm going to pipe it through is select again. So select, and then because we've already sent Gapminder into the new data set, select doesn't have to ask for Gapminder again. It's already been loaded. So we're going to select year, country, GDP per cap, and life expectancy. So now we're going to send, so in this step, Gapminder is going into, is being piped through select. So we've got a couple of things here. And then in the next step, now that we've grabbed our data, we want to sort it using arrange. So after life expectancy, again, we're going to do the pipe symbol, which is Control or Command, Shift, and M. And the next function is arrange. It's arrange. So we're going to arrange, we're going to sort by year and country. The default order is ascending. And if you want to, for example, say have a descending, I'm going to do this with descending year. And then I'm going to use the default ascending for country. So we're gonna sort by two different columns. Okay, and I am going to run that. Oops. Okay, so if you want to look at this now, I'm going to say view, year, view, country, GDP, sorted. So let's take a look at that one and we'll see what we've done with our data set. So you can see we're sorting, the first column I sorted on was year year is descending, starting at 2007, and it goes down. And then countries, which is the second one, that one's ascending. So the first, so you know, you're going through all the, you're working your way through every, you know, sorting everything at next we're sorting the countries in 2007 by ascending, and then, you know, you work your way down to the next, say, I think 2002 is the next one, and then it starts again with the countries. So does that make everybody clear on that one? I guess I can't hear you. So, so that's the first step of what we're going to roll these things through. The next one I'm going to pipe you through is mutate. Now, mutate is what you use to add or to change columns. Now, what I'm going to do is, if you look at your original data set, which would be your country, the life expectancy, as you can see above, it's got 3 decimal places. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna make a new column, which will be life expectancy, and I'm just gonna, this is just for an example, I'm gonna lower it to, say, having a 1 decimal or 2 decimal, something like that. So we're gonna act on this one column and make a new column. Mutate keeps the original data. It's not gonna throw away what we do to life expectancy. Life expectancy, the original, will stay there, and then we're gonna have a new column. So I am going to, now, I'm gonna copy this one because we're just gonna add another layer here. And so you see how we're taking by using piping, we're taking Gapminder and we're just kind of piping our data through different types of functions. Let me make this a little more readable here. So after arrange, and right now arrange is, again, arrange has been sorted. Now, I don't necessarily suggest walking on data you've created, but in this case, we're going to just rewrite this particular sorted database just for the sake of example. So I want to take, after the data goes through arrange and it gets sorted, I'm going to pitch it into another function. I'm going to do the pipe symbol, which is Shift, Control, or Command, depending on your system, and M. So we are now going to use mutate. And I'm going to do age. I'm going to call this new column age rounded. Oops. And that is going to equal round. And I'm going to round life expectancy by 2. Okay? So I hope, let's see. And this here. Let's run this one. What doesn't? It says I have an unmatched bracket. Shouldn't. Okay. Let's try this. Okay, and I have an unmatched bracket. Okay. Oh, wait a second. Here we go. You see down here, if you look down in your console, if you have just a plus, that means that it's kind of waiting for something. You can either give it the missing thing, and which is not the way to fix an error, but in this case, you either give it what you think is missing or you just hit escape. Did that error make sense to people? I don't know, Christian, is that a good example of that error, or can you add anything to that? Okay.
No, I think that's fine.
Okay, that made sense. Okay, so we should go back to year, country, GDP sorted and see, okay, we've got a new column. You can see it's taken the life expectancy, and normally I would probably actually round it to having no decimals, but I just wanted to show you, you've created a new column. If you're doing financial data, you may want to have a column where you're doing math on a specific column that exists already. So in this case, going back to this command over here. So we've created this data set, and basically by using piping, we bounced it through different functions to come out with this particular, to come out with a new data set, which may be more useful either for mapping, for plotting. Okay, so that's one way to kind of get your data, and it can be used for data cleaning in the case of using mutate. Now, the next one of these functions I'm gonna show you is called filter. And what we're gonna do is, again, this is one of those ones. Thankfully, it actually matches the name. You're gonna create a data set where you're filtering. Let's say because GDP had this, Gapminder has all the continents on the planet. But let's say we just want to look at one. And what I'm going to do is use filter to create a data set where we're only looking at Europe. So this is going to be year. And again, I'm creating this new data set because if I don't create something and then use the assignment operator, I'm just going to throw everything will go into your console, which is not very helpful. So I'm doing year, country, and GDP, and then euro. And I'm using the assignment operator, which is control or command, and shift and M. So, oops, that's the wrong one. Okay, just forget I said that. So now we're gonna do the assignment operator. And if anyone can, I haven't found this, if anyone can tell me the key combination to do the assignment operator, I'll be very grateful. Okay, so we've got this new data set, which is gonna be called your country, GDP, and euro. And we're gonna filter for Europe. So the first thing we wanna do is throw our Gapminder data into this new data set, which is Gapminder. And now I'm gonna use the control or command, shift and M, and we have our first pipe. So we're gonna pipe Gapminder into filter. So we wanna filter for a specific continent. So in this case, continent, C-O-N-T-I-N. It's a good thing to have this finishing because I am a terrible speller, and a lot of my errors I get are less programming than the fact I can't spell at all. So now what we're going to use, we're going to use the double quote. The double equal sign, and that's the relationship operator. We're going to say continent is either Europe or something else, true or false. In this case, we want to make sure we've got Europe. So next we're going to put Europe and in quotes. So it's gonna, filter is gonna go through, you take your Gapminder, you're gonna pipe it through filter, which is gonna look at the continents and only pull out Europe, okay? So let's say at this point, if you stop here, you've got all your data except Europe, but maybe you only want certain columns. So we're gonna pipe again, and control or command, shift and M. And please tell me if I'm going too fast, because I have a tendency when I do this to start cranking up a little faster as I go through the lesson. So, tell me to slow down if you want to. So we're gonna, now that we've filtered everything except Europe, we're gonna run our select command again. And let's say we are going to use, year, country, and GDP per cap. And again, I'm going to use the tab command to let it finish it for me. Righty. So now I'm going to try view. And we're going to take a look at GDP euro. Okay. Oh, error. What did I do wrong? Here we go. Let me move this out of the way. It says GDP euro not found. Let's try this again. Year, country, GDP euro. Well, we'll just try running this again.
Hey,
yes.
Jamie, there have been some questions in the chat relating to the use of parentheses around Gapminder. So if you look at the code on line 22 and compare it with the code on line 27, you'll notice that there's a parentheses before Gapminder on line 22 and no parentheses before Gapminder on line 27.
That is probably me doing.
So actually, you don't actually need the parentheses before Gapminder. on line 22, but the code still works because you have an additional closed parentheses on line 25. So the way that it would work for line 27 is that you would just have one less set of parentheses around the overall code. For anyone who's wondering like what that means, like it's just kind of containing all of that information within those parentheses. So it doesn't actually make a difference in the functionality of the code.
Thank you. Sometimes I start typing out of habit, so it's good to remind me that some things are optional or not. So
yeah, it's totally fine. I just hope
Yeah.
that clarifies things. There's several people
Yeah.
asking questions about it, so I just wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to try view here. I know it's there. Okay, so we now have only, again, you can see your data set. We only have Europe. We've got the GDP per capita in all of the countries. And this is one where, again, you know, you've got this new data set, and you could also use a range to sort it, and you could, you know, run through these, you could pipe it again through some different things. But this is an example of just taking, you know, filtering for a specific type of, on a specific column. Okay. Now, is other than the parentheses, is everybody kind of caught up with this or comfortable with it right now? Because if that's okay, I'm going to show you the next one. So, which is group by, and this is a way you can almost create a report by grouping by different elements within your data set. So, hang on here. I am going to, okay, I'm going to type this one out. So this is going to be a data set. It's going to be GDP by continent. So we're going to do some grouping by the continents and see how that looks. And this can almost create sort of a crude report. So GDP by, okay, so again, we're going to read this in, and I'm not going to put the parentheses now for this one. Gapminder, and Command, Control, and M. So we're going to start with the Gapminder data set, and the next thing I'm going to do is group by. And sometimes sometimes it'll pop up telling you what the syntax of the function that you're typing is, and that can be very helpful. When I get through with this command, I want to review for you again, if you have a question about a specific command, what you type to get another form of help. So we're going to do group by, and the column we want to group by, which is the continents. Continent. So, okay, and then now that and then I'm going to pipe it in again through another one called summarize, which it's, you know, you can you'll see you can summarize by, say, by mean, by different types of statistical statistics. The usual ones you would have are mean, min, max, things like that. Okay, so let me do Control or Command, Shift and M, and I will summarize now. So I'm going to do the mean. We're going to get a mean GDP per capita, and the mean GDP per capita. This is going to be something we're creating right now. So one way you can tell that we're creating this as opposed to using something that's existed is I'm saying it's equal. So I'm assigning. Okay. Now here's one thing. Either Christian or one of the helpers, if you can chime in. Usually I know we use the assignment operator. In this case, I'm using equals. And I'll have to test this out. I should have tested this last night, but I'm not sure whether the assignment operator would work for this. I had learned how to use the syntax of summarize, and I tend to use the same thing again.
So just to to point out, there's a lot. So in that line that we're looking at, line 33, 34, 35, there's a lot going on in there. So I just wanted to recap a little bit.
Yeah.
So we're defining a brand new data frame. So GDP by continents can be whatever you want. That's just the variable. We're going to do some stuff. We're going to shove it back in there. Then we have the assignment operator. Then we have the data set that, or the data frame that we're working with. So in this case, it's called Gapminder, but it could be called anything. You start with this raw source of data that you're working with, and we're piping all that information into a function called group by. And so essentially we're saying, hey, I want to create these mini data frames based on the value in this particular column that I pass in. So essentially we're going to create we're splitting it apart, treat these as separate entities. The value in continents. So everything that's Asia should get its own data frame. Everything that's North America should get its own data frame. And so a typical result that a typical reason you want to do that after you have these split out is, like Jamie had mentioned, is you want to do something with those sub data frames. So maybe you want to add up all the values in a certain column. Maybe you want, so in this case, we have these, maybe we want to create a summary, or I'm sorry, like a mean, or we want to pull out the max. So some sort of aggregate function. And could you go back to the code, Jamie?
I was going to show you, you can actually do this. In this case, in the code is creating only one column, but I want to show you what it,
well, can I just finish?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, yeah.
And then the last function that we're passing, so Jamie had mentioned why we're using an equal sign in the last function call summarize. We're defining a brand new column, and we're putting some value in that. So we're saying, hey, create a brand new column called mean GDP per cap and put the results of mean GDP per cap, which is a column that we're passing in from the Gapminder data set that we piped in a couple lines earlier. So it's a little bit different syntax, but we're not assigning that to a new variable. We're assigning it to a new column. Go ahead, Jamie.
Okay, and I want to show you, if you wanted to do more than one of these, that we first, in this one we had done the mean GDP per capita. We could do the same thing. We could do the minimum GDP per cap equals, and this is cap, and I'm going to do mean, min, and max.
So just to each of these, go ahead and keep typing, Jamie. Yeah. Each of these values that Jamie is adding here, you see that there's a pattern to them. It's the name of this new column name and what we want to assign to that column. So we're going to have a brand new column name called mean underscore GDP, and we're going to assign it the mean of this particular column that we're passing in. Now you have to separate these with a comma.
Oh yeah.
After each of these. So this is just typical. I always will run through these.
Okay, so let's do this. Oh, okay. Let me. Okay, let me make a second one. Hang on. Let me just. Now you get to see what it's really like when you're working on this sort of thing. You get to see all my errors. Okay. Let me. Continent summarized. See what I'm doing wrong here. Error in values. GDP. Oh, I see. Hang on. See, you know what the error? What this error I'm getting? The last one I typed was GDP by continents, and that is not. Obviously, that's only text. Okay. So. This. Okay, so now it's happy, and I am going to you can see over here, it's added the mean, the minimum, and maximum GDP per capita. So you get this, you can see you've created this new data set that's been sorted, and you've created new columns. Now, after you've been working your way with your data and creating different kinds of data sets, different things, you may want to, you're going to want to chart them. So I'm going to show you a couple of plots. I'm going to just type them in, and then don't worry if it seems a little bit confusing now. We're going to go through plots later. What this section is going to be is I'm going to just show you what you can do once you've kind of sorted and you've filtered and you've gotten your data down to what you're absolutely going to use and what you need to plot with. So this is we're going to be using ggplot. So library. So I'm going to make sure I have the library loaded, and I'm going to put ggplot. And shouldn't this be ggplot2? Or am I? Oh,
Yes.
yes. Okay. There's another typo in my notes. So now, if you look down below in your console, it says, okay, we've loaded ggplot2, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm using another. Don't worry, this is one we haven't covered. I'm using a function called starts with, and this is one where, pardon me, typo again. Okay. Starts with, we're going to get a subset that we're going to use further down. So just bear with me here, and I am going to starts with, and I want to subset this. So just let's see. Starts with. Okay, what this is doing over here, where it says, oh, sorry, and yet another typo. What Gapminder $ country is doing, it's saying, I just want the column country, country that is within Gapminder. So this is just referring to a singular column. So what we want to do is we're going to go into this single column, and we want to just get the first letter of the country column. And why it says start and stop equals 1, oops, is this is going through the Gapminder column, and we just want that first letter, okay? Okay, let's see here, substring, Gapminder. Let's see what my typo is this time. Okay. That was great when this worked last night. Okay, a substring. Let's see, starts. Start one, stop one. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, here's my mistake. You see over here, I have two equal signs. I should just have one. So let's try this again. Okay. So what I have at this point is, okay, I'm going to show you the values. Okay, so we've got something which lists the first letters. Now I'm going to use that. We're going to use this by getting the countries that start with. I want to just have the countries that start with A and the countries that start with Z. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this listing, and we're going to use that to pick those countries out. So just like again, oops, sorry here. So I'm creating a new data set, and controller command shift M, and that's the wrong one. I'm going to use my assignment operator. Now, Gapminder, And that's my Gapminder data set. And we're gonna, for this one, we're using brackets. And starts. And this is referring to that starts with data set that I created earlier, data frame I created earlier. So we're doing starts with. And if you've ever used, I don't know if you've used SQL, if anybody has, this may look familiar, because sometimes when you're looking in certain types of SQL commands, you're looking within a list, you use in. The way that similar function is in here is we're gonna do percent in percent. So this is saying take the starts with data set and look within that list for countries that start with A, well, things that start with A and with Z, okay? And we have to have one more comma, and I am gonna run this, and don't worry if this is a bit, this is more an example of how, for plotting. Don't worry if this is kind of complicated looking. Again, when we go through some of this in the next workshop, we're gonna, you're gonna see how you can build up things with ggplot the same way you do with dplyr. Okay, I want to run this one. Okay, and this time I didn't have any of my famous typos, so that's working okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to do, now I'm going to use ggplot to make a plot with this. So it's going to be, oh, sorry?
Jamie, can I just call, so
Please.
Just, there's some questions that have been a theme that, hey, we've been using parentheses and now we're using square brackets. What's up with that? Right? What's the difference between one or the other? So this is something that's absolutely confusing, and it's kind of annoying, but it's sort of something you have to roll with. I don't, is there as like 4 or 5 different ways, or not even, there's numerous different ways to do the same thing. And after you start to see, and so that our community just sort of goes to certain conventions for things, and it could be like something happens one way, and then for some reason the community switched to another way. So I just want to explain what some of these things mean. So when you see something like on line 41, we have Gapminder $country. That is a way to specify a specific column in a data set. So the format for that is data set name, $, and then the column name. So that's saying, hey, pass this particular column as an argument to this function in the substring function. And there was a question like, what does that mean? I'll explain that in a minute. And just below that, we have these square brackets, and that is a way of also picking apart different pieces in that data set. In this case, if you don't give any values, it applies to the entire data set. So anything that starts with the value A or Z, we want to pull that out and put that into a variable called az.countries. And let me just go back earlier. So on line 41, there's starts .with, and that is a variable. So there was a great question in the chat earlier, like, hey, why, we've been putting data sets in variables. Why would we want to put anything else? So here's an example of where we're going to put something else other than a data set in a variable that we're going to work with later. So it's a place to stash some data. So there's a function called substr, which is just shorthand for substring. So, and it takes a few different arguments. The first one is, what do we want to look for a substring? What do we want to pull out? and in this case, we're going to say, hey, look at the, so starts.with is the name of a variable in this case. So, which I know is confusing because in other programming languages, we have dot, we have a dot something means something else in a different programming language. So in this case, start and stop mean the character that we want to pull out. So we're going to start at the first character and also stop at the first character. So basically, pull out the first character of every value in this particular column and put it in the value starts with. And so you know what, on that line below, why don't you just print out starts with, and we can take a look at what is in there, and it'll be a vector of our values.
Oops, no. So this is
So-
gonna,
So these are all, this basically what we did is we went through every single value in the country column, and we picked off the very first character, and we just said, pull that out and put this into its own, this is a vector, which you think of it as kind of a mini data set. And there was a question was, why couldn't we just define starts with AZ countries using piping? Yeah, absolutely. You're right. So you can, so that's the beauty of piping, is you can slam all this stuff into one big command. And sort of, and it just sort of depends on the type of development you like sometimes. So it's definitely more efficient from like a typing perspective to put everything in a command. Sometimes it's difficult for debugging. So if you type in this, you have this huge command, and in this case, maybe, it turns out we're not getting the end result that we were looking for. It's sometimes difficult to pick apart that command to debug it, be like, oh, what did I do wrong here? But if you have each individual piece in a variable, you can be like, okay, I'm going to run this. All right, this is what I expect. I'm going to run this next chunk. Okay, this is what I expect. So it's just a matter of preference. There's no right or wrong for that. But you absolutely could use the same techniques that we learned that Jamie had spoke about earlier, and just piping it through. And so the next question was, so the dot notation doesn't mean anything. It could be starts. Yeah, it could be called either of those. And like Yves had mentioned, theoretically you can, but you just have to make sure it doesn't clash with already existing function names. So
Christian, I'm going to test it out right now.
Yeah. So like an example would be like, in line 41, there is a function name called substring. It would be, I would double check. I'll double check it to run it, but you couldn't have a variable also named that, because then the interpreter wouldn't know, well, I don't know if you're using this as a variable or a function name. So I personally don't like the dot notation. This is just personal preference. This is nothing, just because I'm used to other programming languages, and that means something completely different, but there's no right or wrong with it. It's sort of a matter of personal preferences. And like Yves had mentioned, yes, theoretically you can name those, but yeah, I'm a fan of just like, yeah, there's no right or wrong. Like there's also camel case. You could use like starts, nothing, no dot, and then capital W with, yeah. So this is, so that's, some people use that technique, and there's no right or wrong, also sometimes that's a little tough to read. So there's pros and cons to all these.
Yeah, I just tested the starts with in my own window, and I just assigned it to a random variable, and it assigns a variable. But I think I would avoid using it, just because like when I'm writing out the code, like the RStudio would have a hard time differentiating between especially in autocomplete, since I don't know if folks are using autocomplete, but I use autocomplete like all the time. And if I accidentally autocomplete the starts with variable instead of the starts with function, then it can like totally throw off the way that the code is written. So as Christian was saying, like there's a lot of different ways that you can notate or annotate the variables, but generally avoiding the assigning variables to things that are the same names as functions is like a best practice.
Yeah, and so there's a question like, yeah, okay, great. So what's, what do folks generally do in R? And so on this, and it's sort of, so the answer, which is terrible, I hate this answer as well. It depends. So like on this page, we already see almost like 3 different ways of doing it. So on line 36, we have mean underscore GDP underscore per cap. That's one way to name thing with, I think that's called snake case, where you have underscores. Then we have camel case right next to it, which is mean capital P per cap. Then we have this dot notation on line 41, starts dot with, and 44. So I will say what I have seen in general is that in the past, the R community has favored starts dot with, so separating names with periods. But it seems like they've moved away from that a little bit. And I've seen the underscore notation a little bit more. So keeping everything all lowercase and separating words by underscore. But there's no, your code won't break if you use either one or the other. So I
guess we're just supposed to be consistent.
Yeah. So I think
consistency is everything.
Right.
Like
that's a great
comment code.
Yeah. And like, so regarding the question, like if it's stylistic, like for me, like I change the way I notate or I set my variables depending on how I'm feeling at the time, which maybe isn't the best way of doing it. But if you're running like a set of code, it's best to keep it consistent because that way you can kind of make sure that you can follow along what you do.
Okay, we're gonna next. I'm gonna use ggplot to make a plot of the data that's just been created. So we're gonna start with ggplot, and the data in this case equals AZ countries. Now, ggplot has its own kind of syntax, and they use a term you're going to see called AES for aesthetic. And when we get into plotting, that's going to be described in more detail. So this is more to give you an example. So just, I guess, be patient for this, and you'll find out more. Because this is a plot, we need to define our X and Y axes. So the X-axis will be year. The Y-axis will be life expectancy. And we're going to also just give this a color equals continent. ggplot uses the plus sign when it's adding things, when it's piping, or I guess piping wouldn't be the right term. It would be when it's concatenating different things together. So correct me on that one. And Geo,
yeah, you can. So you can keep typing, Jamie. So essentially, so ggplot is a plotting library for us that we used last time, and we're going to dig into a little bit like what do each of these little pieces mean. And the way ggplot typically works is you type ggplot, you pass in your data set. So we see that in this case, we have data equals AZ countries, which we created a little bit earlier, which is a subset of our data that only includes countries starting with A and Z. And then you apply aesthetics to the graph that you want. So in this case, you define the x-axis, you define the y-axis. There's a number of different arguments here. And then you use the plus sign to just sort of tack on different features. So and we'll go over some of these features, and I'll post a link to like sort of the subset of all features. It would be like, okay, I want to have lines. No, I want to have dots. I want to have certain operations, and you can think of like layers on top of a graph, and you can keep adding those.
If I pull let's see, I wanted to see if I could display the plot here. Can you see this on the shared screens?
Can you click zoom or double click?
I did. I clicked zoom. I don't know if is it showing it there?
No, you may have to
Okay.
reshare it or.
All right, I'm going to reshare this because it is. Stop the share. Okay, hang on just a minute here. Will it show my share screen? I'm not sure. Let's see. Let's try this again. I'm trying to see if I can. For some reason, I can't seem to pull. Oh, wait, here it is. Okay, here we go. So this is the plot that created. You can see over here, it's all the countries that start with A or with Z, and it gave them a line graph. So that was created from the data that we just filtered and down. So I'm gonna go back to, let's see, where's my, oh, stop share. I am going to go back to the share screen and get R again. Okay. Christian, since it's 10 o'clock, do you want to go through the other plots now, or do you want to give people a break?
I think it's best practice for Zoom meetings to give a break, a short break, at least every hour or so. So
yeah.
I think we should probably just kind of give people a little bit of time to look away from their screens.
Okay.
So why don't we do this? We'll take a break for 10 minutes, and then when people come back, we'll split into breakout rooms, and we'll try out some of these exercises. So around like 20 after, folks come back in, and then we'll run some breakout rooms. Then in the meantime, I'll be here. I'll answer some questions that we had. There's a couple. So the one question I was just typing in, but Gino had answered it. So I just want to call out. So there was a question on, hey, we used C parentheses and some stuff. What does that mean? And the C and that was a good call out because we didn't cover it directly in here. So you see that a lot. You can think of the C function creates, like Gino had mentioned, that creates a vector. And we've said that a few different times. So a vector is, you can think of it as a mini data set. It's just a single column of values. So an easy way to manually create that is C, and then the values that you want to place in the vector. So in this case, the question was, hey, we have C, quote, A, comma, Z. That's a vector. The result of that is a vector controlling two values, A and Z. But you could keep putting more and more value. You could put any number of values that you wanted into in there. Jamie, did you want to share your screen again for the code for the plot?
Yeah.
And we'll post it. We'll also post it in the Etherpad. And there is an error. Must request at least one color from a hue palette. I don't know that error off the top of my head. So let me see what that one is.
I think for this one, the color is based on the continent.
So great question. Like, hey, okay, we chose, so can you, Jamie, do me a favor and just print out, just type C parens A comma Z.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just not the fastest typist. Okay.
And just run that.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at this.
If you look down below.
So this has two values, A and Z. So there's a great question. Okay, cool. I want A through Z. And I think you can do, so that's a great question. And what makes it a little tricky is characters are treated differently than numbers. So like if you wanted, there's certain syntax to do like ranges like that. So if you do like, we'll do 1:20, 130. So this will create exactly what you said, like and just run that, Jamie. So there you go. You have it's an easy shorthand way to do 1 through 30. And there's slight tweaks you can do to that. Like someone asked above, hey, there's an extra like hanging comma up there. You can like have it in steps. So you can maybe say, oh, I want to do every 5th value from 1 to 30. I don't know so can you, Jamie, just try, do C, quote A colon Z. I don't know if I don't think this will work, but let me see if this does. No. So that's a great question. To do A through Z, I don't know how you would do that. I'll have to take a look after. Like I can think of some more complicated ways. Like maybe you could like, I'm probably making more complicated than it could be. Like you could have 1 through 24 and then convert that back to a letter, but that doesn't seem efficient.
Yeah. I think I didn't code this right. This one over here, I think I've coded this one wrong. If I want to do it in steps, let's see. How did this work? Question marks. Oh wait.
Huh. Okay. So I just looked up that quickly, and there's a couple interesting ways to get ranges of letters, none of which are very intuitive. So I'll post those in the Etherpad, but there is a way to do it. And I'm just catching up on some of the questions here. So another one was, can you explain what %in% means in line 144?
That would be, you're looking in a list is essentially what that is. That's why I'd asked if people used SQL at all, because there's a way you can search saying you're looking for something in, and then a list that would be in parentheses. And so this is it's a similar. You're looking for something within a range of values.
Yeah. So in this case, it's this filter. Yeah, this filter where we're saying if there's a value in starts with that matches, that is in the vector that we create, and that could actually be a variable as well. But so basically, if there's something if there's something in the vector starts with that is A or Z, then put it into that matches and put it in this other variable called AZ countries. So you can think of it as we're filtering the data. And we could do, there's more than one way to do something. So we could use pipes and filter, which we learned earlier today in that. And then Jamie, do you want to take there's a question. We'll wait. I guess when we come back at 20 after, then
Okay.
You may want to explain genome line and facet wrap a little bit more.
I'm sorry. I hope I can explain those more. I'll need to see if I can divide the screen and show them the. Let's see if this is readable, because
Yeah, that's fine. You have a few minutes.
Yeah. So. I want to bring up the graphic. Where did the chart go? Go find the plot again. Just trying to find the plot. I actually just made this. Wish there was a way I could get this to have the screen with both things. That doesn't. Can you see the plot the way I have it now? Both of these on the screen?
No, I don't see.
I can't see a plot.
You can't see a plot. Okay. Okay. Well, I guess I'll just have to do it without that. I wish there was a way that you could see both of these together, but. After we're done, I've got some notes in here on some things I want to change in the lesson, because I was using the code in the original lesson. So I think maybe I might change the way they do those vector names, just so it's more consistent.
So Jamie, do you want to go through that line 47, 48 one more,
Yeah.
and then and we'll recap that, and then we'll split into groups. There's about
Okay.
so and I'll just answer. There was a question. Explain the different data types: int, factor, char, a bit. So this is something also very good call out that we glossed over a bit. So a lot of this stuff we sort of just we gloss over and then circle back to. So these are all really good questions that we have, just because there's so much to get started. Like, to feel productive, we like just diving in and typing some stuff and then sort of like backward engineering it. I found that that's a helpful learning experience, but it's also confusing. It's just like, oh, you're typing, you know, numbers here, and then so you got something in quotes here. What's going on? So what I mean by a data type is there's certain ways, if you have information encoded in a certain way, there's certain operations that you can perform on it. So for example, if you have letters, it doesn't make sense, which I'm using sort of as a analog to characters. If you have letters A, B, C, it doesn't make intuitive sense to add these. So if you said A plus B, you know, what does that equal? Now something will happen, you know, behind the covers, but it may not be what you expect. But whereas like 1 plus 2, you would expect to see 3. So what that means is the way that your data is represented is important if you want to perform certain operations on it. So in the case of an integer, we just explained that you can use a lot of the typical operations that you would normally associate with numbers. So, hey, I want to filter this data set. Give me everything greater than this number. You can't do that necessarily intuitively with with characters. Something will happen, you know, and R will try to make a best guess, like what you mean by that. If you said, give me everything greater than C, it's probably smart enough to figure out, oh, they mean everything that's A and B, you know, but there's no guarantee. So whereas if you have characters, let's say you have a vector that has the names of the participants. So Christian, Jamie, Gino. If these were numbers, it wouldn't necessarily make sense. Hey, give me everything that starts with K. that would return. So stuff like starts with, ends with, contains. So if you want to have get everybody that their name has Chris in it. That wouldn't make sense for integers. So you have to make sure that your data is encoded properly to perform the operations that you're interested in. Factor is another special, it is a way of, so often that you'd want to treat a set of characters as a category. And essentially this is what a factor does. So it would, if you have, what would be an example of this? A typical would be like, maybe you have a survey respondents, and there was a column for sex, and you got this from survey data, and all the values in the column were M and F. Maybe you want to perform some certain operations on that would be easier with an integer, or if you encode that, and you can turn that into a factor. So it's basically a way of encoding those character values into categories and treat them as a number, and it allows you to be more flexible with some operations. Hopefully that it explains things a little bit. So data types are ways of just encoding your data. So this is, we may get into a little bit later. So where this is important is if you're reading and so in our case, we've used canned data sets in here that are already pretty much cleaned. So it's not too much of an issue. But like if you have your own data, you're reading in an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. R will take its best guess at what it thinks a column is. It'll look at it and it'll say, okay, these look like all numbers, so I'm going to treat this as an integer. Or there looks like there's to be some characters in here, so I'm going to treat it that way. But you have to really double check, because you can get into some problems. So like an issue would be something as simple as, let's say you had survey results in a spreadsheet, you read that in, you're like, all right, let's get to work. And one of the columns was income, and all the values in income were just happened to be, for some reason, they were submitted in quotes. So, instead of 50,000 50000, you had quote 50000 quote. R will look at that and go, hey, this looks like a set of characters to me, and it will treat it completely differently than if you expected that as a number. So that's probably outside the scope of this, but it's just something to keep in mind if you run into some errors, or you're expecting to do something. So a great example would be, you read this in, and then you want to average of all the the incomes and it blows up. You get an error. It'll be like some cryptic error message, like this is not data type not supported, or something like that. I would look at that column and double check that, oh, okay, I need to make sure that this is in a format that makes sense for the type of operation that I'm performing on it. So Jamie, do you want to go over this, and then we'll split into groups?
Sure. I'm going to go over the plot, and I'm sorry that I can't show you the plot as I'm talking about, but we're using the ggplot function, and that's what we're using to create the plot. This first part over here where it says data equals az.country, that's saying ggplot use az.country as your data that we're going to plot. Part of what ggplot uses, it's called aesthetics, and aesthetics will be you're deciding what the look of your plot is. In this case, the x-axis is going to be the year, and the y-axis as the life expectancy. Now, if you run this, you're going to see that on the left side, sort of on the side, it'll say life expectancy. That's the title for the y-axis. On the bottom, we'll have the years. And then the color is going to be based, the color will be based on the continent. And if you were going to look, say, the legend of the continent, the legend for the continent, it will list, you know, Africa, Americas, Asia, Europe. All those will have a different color. So when they say color, that means that's going to be chosen by which continent you have. And then there's a plus sign, because like dplyr, ggplot will let you stack different things. So there's a plus sign, and then it says geom line. That's the geometry, and it's going to use a line. Now, again, on the plot, each of them will, instead of say dots or bars, it's going to use a line for those plots. And so I'm going to bring this up again. I'll bring up my output from the plot again after I do this. So after you've chosen the aesthetics, you've chosen the line, then there's a plus, and it says facet, wrap, and then tilde and country. What that's doing is you're going to, instead of having one plot with all the countries together, you're going to have separate plots. And this is just the way it's coded. There's a tilde, and it says, what do you want to separate? What do you want to facet all these plots by? In this case, it's by country. So maybe I should bring up the plot again. So I'm going to switch what I'm sharing. Hang on a sec. Zoom. Okay. All right. So let me try to bring that plot up again. I'm going to stop this share, and let's see if I can find. Okay. Let's try this. Oh, okay. Can people? No, this doesn't look right. I got this plot came up kind of small, so let me try this again. Okay, see if I can get this zoom. This keeps coming out. This is coming out very tiny. No. I'm trying to find someplace I can get a reasonably sized plot. Okay, this looks better. Well, I apologize. My plot keeps coming out tiny, so I'm going to try to share what I have for this.
Do you want to just share your RStudio and then just move the little window? It just maximize the window.
I'll try that. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Okay, and let's see. I'm going to do this and make the plots larger. Okay. So let's do this. Run that plot again. Okay. So let me try to get this a little larger. So again, so this is faceted into different countries, and that's where that said the facet wrap. That means, you know, again, you're separated out into all these, separating by individual plots. On the right, you can see where it says continent, and then it lists the continents, and all those lines are different colors. That's where you have this over here where it says aesthetics, countries, and color equals continent. The color equals continent means that each of these different countries, their line that they use to show the life expectancy is going to be a different color. Africa's everything on the African continent's in red. Europe is in blue, like over here. Angola's red, and then Albania is part of Europe, so that's in blue. Afghanistan, Asia. So you can see that the colors will tell you which continent they're on. And then the X equals year, that's your X. Move this out of the way. As you can see on the bottom, that's your X axis. So all the years, like starting in 1950, let me make this larger even. I'm trying to get these countries to show a bit better. Can you, is this at least somewhat readable? Because there's a lot of years in here that kind of crammed together, but you see on the bottom 1950 through 2000.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Like the takeaways are, so the typical questions are like, okay, cool. I don't like these colors, it assigns them randomly, just so this is kind of like an easy win to just get something up and running. But one thing I want to stress is that you can tweak you can tweak every little single option on this chart. We won't go into it, but it's like if you want to have the labels at 45-degree angles, you want to have everything a hue of blue. There's all sorts of different options for that. There's a litany of different options. So
Yeah, I would probably run the year at 45-degree angles because that would make the years more readable.
Yeah, so we won't we may get into that as some of our later sessions, but not. The takeaway is, if you look at this and you're like, this thing's ugly, I don't like this background or whatever, you can change. Everything about that is changeable. I want the legend on the top left or whatever. You can tweak all of that. These are what we were just showing is just like the easy win to just show something to get an idea of what you're looking at.
Yeah, you could say instead of geom line, it could be I think it's geom dot. We'll post a reference, but you can all these different parts.
So thank you for the link, Charlotte. That's a great link, and like you could spend months just diving into the documentation. So the takeaway to know is you can tweak this. So why would you want to do this? If you have a publication that follows very specific standards, you can do that. And just to plug, for Eaves is very knowledgeable about taking content and then tweaking it for publication. So if you're like, oh, I really need to jazz this up, there are other tools like Adobe Illustrator that may be more efficient in certain things. And so definitely reach out to Eaves if you have something that you are, want to publish in a journal or report that you're like, this is just hideous, and I want to jazz it up. There are options to do that.
Yeah, please feel free to reach out. I can put some contact information in the chat for anyone who's interested.
And just to clarify, Eaves is short for Ibrahim.
Yes, sorry.
That's what we call him, and he's okay with it. So, or that's his nickname.
Yes, that's my nickname. People can refer to me as Eaves.
So I think there was close to 35-ish participants, and I think there's 5 helpers. So do we want to split into I guess 7 groups? Do you want to 5 different groups? I'm sorry, we have 7 people each. Jamie, do you just want to, and then just randomly assign?
I've got 36 participants into 5. We've got 5 rooms.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so we're going to split into like these breakout rooms. There's 3 exercises we'll do, which, maybe trivial, maybe not, we'll go through them. And the idea would be, one of us will share our screen and we'll type through it and work through some of them. And there'll be a helper. There'll be a helper in each room. The exercises we were going to go through are on line 326. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't reload that. So, on 326 on the Etherpad. So, and then Jamie's just going to randomly assign us. We're going to try this out with Zoom. So if 2 helpers get into a room, we'll just jump to one of the other rooms where there's not a helper in it.
Okay, I'm going to create them now. Okay, open all the rooms. Where's Christian? Ah, I gotta find him. Okay, how do I get, oops. How do I make,
Hey, Jamie.
I'm trying to find Christian. I'm sorry, I'm kind of lost in here. I need
Oh,
to
it's
make him the
okay.
co-host, but I gotta find him.
I guess we can keep this one as a breakout room. I'm not
Yeah. Where is Christian? I'm sorry, I've lost
sure. Are
him.
you able to see which breakout rooms there are?
I'm kind of frantically going through these right now. I need to make him a co-host, but
Oh, let me
Oh.
see if
he's in, I don't see him. There's Ibrahim and where'd he go? Oh, here he is. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go join, let's see, Christian. Let me go join, I'm gonna join 5 and change Christian.
Wait, I was
Oh.
put in 3, and that was with Ibrahim. So
Okay, Christian's in 5, and someone said to make Christian a co-host, so I've got to go over there and I'll join that so I can get to him.
okay.
All right.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let me. So that there were just a few exercises, just using some of the tools
I
that
don't hear
we had
anybody.
learned earlier. Hey, Jamie, you're in our section, or you're in our room. Let me ping you. And one of them was, so the first exercise we had was just like write a command that will produce a data frame that has the African values for life expectancy, country and year, but not for other continents. And how many rows does that have? So the first thing, I just make sure I was typing this and I ran into an error.
Hey, Jamie. Hey, Jamie. Are there any rooms that don't have helpers? I think you're muted.
Somehow I've lost the audio. I can't seem to hear anything. Okay, let's try this again. Switch into a breakout room. When I switched into a breakout room, I lost my audio. So I
Oh,
can't
that's weird.
Oh, okay, now I can hear you. I couldn't make Christian a co-host when I went into the room with him. It seems like we have to be in the same place, but I also couldn't seem to change what I thought he was a co-host before, so I'll have to switch him to that. I'm not sure what I was doing wrong on that. It just wasn't giving me the option.
I don't think I'm a host, so
Okay, let me see. I'll
when
make
I do join breakout room, I put into room 3 and Eves is already in there, so I might just join that one.
I can, okay, make you a okay, now you're a co-host.
Oh, I am. Okay.
Yes. I cannot seem to get. It's weird when I switched rooms, all of a sudden my audio got lost. But I found if I unplug it and replug it in again, it's okay. Maybe I should pause the recording while we're doing breakout.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think everybody's back. We have 35. We didn't lose, maybe we lost one or two people, but I think everybody's back. So Eves had a great question. At least in my room, people seemed to really appreciate the exercises, and it was a positive experience. And it was asked if we could do some more of those. So we'll incorporate. It's a great way to do, like, sort of ask questions that may not get answered in a larger group. Eves had suggested like doing a recap. Do any of the other helpers want to share how you solved something, or any particular experience, or any call outs that you want to highlight?
Well,
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it sounded like we didn't have a helper in one of the rooms, so I apologize for that. Okay, so that was a good question. We didn't get to question 3 either. So
I got in late to the one group that didn't have a host and the helper, and we didn't quite get to 3 either.
So 3 actually uses a few functions that we didn't, or uses one function that we didn't cover. So I think it would actually be worth going through that exercise. And then we can keep pivot tables a little bit shorter. I think I can cut that lesson down a little bit. So let me share my screen.
I made you the host, so you should be able to do that okay.
Okay, so I won't see the chat now, so any of the helpers, just if I'm rambling or there are questions, just ping me. Or just unmute and yell. Just to highlight a few things I want to call out. So we had, the idea was to just use some of the functions that we learned. And so these are the functions that we learned, so you get your biggest bang for their buck that we learned. Like, we learned select, which is a way just to pick columns, filter, which is a way to filter on the values in those columns. We learned group by, which is a way to aggregate things. Summarize, which allows you to perform operations on aggregates. So typically is mean, median, mode, things like that. And mutate, which takes 2 columns. You want to do something with them and then make a new column based on that. And the third, so just go over the third question was calculate the life expectancy in 2002 of 2 randomly selected countries for each continent. then arrange the continent names in reverse order. So this will use most of the functions that we learned. It won't use mutate, but we can go over that. So the first thing we'd do is create our variable that we're going to store our data frame in. So we can call this anything. So I'll just do life expectancy. We have our assignment operator. Then we define the data set that we're working with, so Gapminder. And then we want to send this to a series of operations. So I'll hit Shift Control M. You can actually type in percent greater than percent if you want. So there's a question in my breakout room, does the order of these matter? And the order definitely matters. Like, you can think of these as flowing through a waterfall. And after you perform a certain operation on it, you have a reduced data set based on what you did. So for example, if you filter something on a year, the operations after that won't have any of the other years. So if you perform a filter on 2002 and then later on in your pipeline you try to grab something from 1990, it won't be there. You won't get any results. So that's just something to be aware of. So the question again was calculate the life expectancy in 2002. So the first thing is like, okay, cool. Well, let's just reduce our data set. So we'll do filter. We know we have these columns. So we're working with this data. So I look at this, I'm like, okay, it looks like the year column has values of years we want to work with. So we pick our column name, year, and we know this because it's in our data set that we defined up here. And we have a double equal sign because the filter is special. And you have a double equals, this is a Boolean operation, so it's performing a compare. It's just like essentially, if this matches this, then include it. And that's different than a single equals symbol, which is I know that's confusing, but double equals is essentially a match in a Boolean operation. And if it's unclear, if someone could follow up in the chat with that. So we know that we are going to narrow it down on 2002, and the next part of this was we're going to get the average life expectancy in 2002 of 2 randomly selected countries for each continent. So let's first bucket these things by continent. So after we run this, which we can do now, this is a great way to debug, is actually run this and then take a look at the results. So if I do life, and make sure you have what you expected to find. So if I look at this and I see stuff from 1999 in here, I would be like, oh, okay, well, I messed up my filter somehow, and you go back and debug it. So we'll run this, just double check. And we see all these values are 2002. So, okay, cool, looking good. Next thing we want to do is to group by. So we want to essentially squash values into, we want to group everything by and create separate data frames for each continent. So we can do that by group by, and then you pass it a column name from our data set, from our data frame that we defined a little bit earlier. So from this data frame, we want to filter by 2002, and then from all those filtered by 2002, we want to group it by continent. And then this is, we didn't review this, but so this next one. So the question was, of those that we just grouped by, just randomly pick some of those. So there is a function that will randomly sample a data set called sample underscore n, and you can pass it the value of the number of samples that you want. So in this case, we asked for 2 in the question, but you could be 3, 5, 7, whatever, anything up to the size of the table, or 1. It could be 1 here. So we'll do 3 just to jazz it up, and then we want to get the average life expectancy, so the mean of this for each of these. So we saw that the way to do aggregate functions is to use summarize. And I want to call this out. So there's 2 different, there's summarize with an S and summarize with a Z. Again, this sort of speaks to, these aren't, I don't believe these are the same operation. So it's important to get that right. If someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. It was just developed by different people. I think one was developed by a group in Australia, and I'm not sure where the other one was. So people had spelled it differently. So in here we saw that we define a column name, and then we set that to a value of something, which is, again, different from a double equals. We're going to use a single equals. So we're going to create a new column in our mini data frame called min life x, and this could be anything. And this column name could be anything. And we want to set this equals, we want to put the result of something into this column using the mean function. And the mean function takes an argument of a column that we want to perform those operations on. So we'll do life expectancy. And we know that, so we're saying this filters through. So hey, of those 2,000, of those that are rows that have a year equals 2002, group it by the continent, randomly pick 3 of those continents, and of that, give me the average of the resulting column that's in life expectancy. And then Jamie went over this briefly. So if you want to sort these values, there's a operation called arrange. And then you pass it the column name that you want to sort on. And by default, it sorts it by ascending. And if you want to go in reverse order and descending, you can use the desc function. And we pass it the column that we want to sort by. So we just created a column above here that's our mean value, so we want to sort on that.
I got a question here from someone.
Sure.
And they said, wouldn't we want to use a different data frame name than life expectancy, since that's also a column we're using? Should we use something like life expectancy 2002 again? And he also said, this person, or Erin also said, she thought we wanted to sort descending on the continent name.
Yeah, no, that's a great, you both go a great call out. So one, yeah, this is probably a terrible name for a variable. So let me add by continent, which there may be some, you're absolutely right, there may be some confusion. If I were to pull this out, it would be a mess. And then this should be continent. And it looks like it was complaining about this, so let me rerun this. So we ran this, we updated this to be continent, which is, yeah, which would be basically, I guess, reverse alphabetical based on that name. And now we have a much better named data frame, and we can take a look at this. So it looks like this is reverse alphabetical. So, and we can, we can prove that by, if we took this out, you can keep the double parens if you want. There's nothing in here. And then we can rerun this. And so now this would be the other way around. So it would be, like, so it's Asia, Americas, Africa, Americas, Asia, Europe, Oceania. We could also, so this is by continent, we could also say, hey, if I want the, in the case that I had previously had, maybe I want, hey, give me the folks with the highest life expectancy, the highest average life expectancy. We could put that here. And if we take a peek at this, well, this is in ascending, but we could reverse if we wanted in descending. So this is from lowest to highest. So it was sort of I apologize if that was a little long-winded, but does that help? Was there any questions in the chat? Does that help explain things a little bit better with that exercise? I'm just going to trust the helpers. If you can call out if there's any.
Christian, there is a question about in the question, the exercise, there were supposed to be, it mentions 2 randomly selected countries for each continent. Is that what we're supposed to be expecting in the output?
So that's a great question. You know what? I didn't check that. So if that is true, which I'm assuming it is based on this, is that each time we run this, then this mean life expectancy should change if they're randomly selected. So let me just double check that. So if I look at this, we ran it this time, and Asia was 52.071. If we run it again, we can see it's different. So it is randomly, you can tell it's randomly selecting them because each time I run that, it randomly picks 2, and we get a different mean life expectancy. So it is performing. I don't know why you'd want to do that. It is performing that. It would be terribly confusing.
So for each continent, it's randomly selecting 2 countries.
Yes, and performing. Yeah. So maybe if you wanted to do, I don't know, some statistical. I'm trying to think of a use for this. Like statistical analysis of like. Yeah, buckets. If I randomly, I don't know, reducing outliers or something like that. If we're randomly picking, if you randomly selected things, or you would. This isn't really a realistic example, but it shows how if you wanted to randomly sample data, you could.
Cool.
I think this example makes me think of the statistical analysis of bootstrapping. I don't fully understand it, but I know that you can randomly select from your data set and compare like means or statistical values from random selections of things, as opposed to like, specific categories. Like if we're comparing these different countries, like how does that data reproduce? I'm doing a poor job of explaining it, but there is potential use for this. I definitely agree that it's maybe not the best example. But another way of just visualizing the random selection of these countries is looking at Christian's code. If we just cut off summarized and arranged, and we just leave it at sample N2, you can see what countries it's selecting. So you're gonna have to remove that pipe. It's gonna give you some issue because Christian, you still have a pipe after sample N2. So what you can see is now your life expectancy by continent. If you look at it now, you have a selection of countries, but if you repeat that, you're going to get a different selection of countries.
Somebody has a question that relates to that. They're asking, how does R know to choose 2 countries as opposed to choosing 2 of another variable?
I think.
So that's a great question. So how does it, you're absolutely right. So it's like, hey, we got a lot of rows in here, and we're only selecting 2. How does it know how to do that? So this is what's cool about sort of debugging is I'll just comment this out and Eve had suggested. So the magic happens in this group by. So group by sort of squashes everything and says, create mini data frames for everything in this particular continent. So we have, if we run this and then take a look at this again, it's,
I think it's not actually showing the group by.
Yeah, it's not. It's there is a way to
like force it to show.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing because it's like does some stuff behind the scenes where it treats these. But the reason it knows how to do that is because we're telling it group by, so it treat these as a different. Whereas if you were to leave this out. So this is perfectly, I think this is perfectly legit. This would just choose, I think, a random 2 records out of here. Oops. Yeah.
So in other words, because
So
you're
we
grouping,
get 2. Yeah.
because you're grouping by country or by continent, it just randomly picks from the continent, from the separate continents.
Yes.
Yes. So we saw here, like if I just leave this out altogether and run this, it just randomly picks 2 records out of the previous filtered data set that we're passing in. Is that clear?
Let's see. Person said, makes sense, thank you.
Okay, cool. And then, so yeah, I mean, this is good that we spent some time to go through this, because if you can understand this, like this is a huge, like this is really like this chunk, this sort of the philosophy behind this. I have a data set, I can filter it. I want to perform summary operations, aggregate operations, and I want to sort that data. That will get you 50 to 60% of the way there when you're working with data sets, just like reducing it to what you're working with. And then if you throw in mutate, which we had some earlier examples with, that gets you even farther. We have limited time, so I was probably gonna spend maybe 10 minutes talking about pivot tables. I think and then there was a lot of requests I don't think we'll have time for the exercises, but there's a lot of requests to open up at the end for other questions. And then also we wanted to send out a feedback survey a little bit earlier. So to make sure that you guys have time to fill it out, you'd be like, hey, this is, the pace was too slow. We need more exercises. Anything that you guys, opinions, we want to leave you time to submit that to us. one of the common issues that you experience with working with data is you have data in different formats. So like you have what's called a wide table format versus a long table format. And it's helpful to know how to transform between the two. So this is can be thought of similar to how we use the group by operation. And it's also similar to the concept of pivot tables, if you're already familiar with that in Excel. So maybe it's easier to, we have a value that's repeated many times in a row, and we'd like to turn that into a column header, and then maybe have tallies for those. And there's a lot of operations that we can perform that helps us to do something like that. So in an example, I'm going to paste this command in the Etherpad. So we were going to work with a subset of the Gapminder data that was in a wide table format, just to show what it looks like. And this is something we haven't covered yet, but I just want to show this little snippet is really helpful, and you'll use this quite often. So something we didn't show explicitly, we used the Gapminder library, and when we used that, there was some questions in the first class like, hey, you're just typing library Gapminder, and then you type view Gapminder, and then if I run this, and it's like, what the heck? How did this get here? You know, and the reason that we have that is because we imported it from a library, and this has already been canned and sort of cleaned up for us. That's not going to be the case with your data, so most likely, I'm guessing. So you're going to want to read this in from some source. So R has a lot of helper functions to do that. You can, think we'll get to it in the last lesson, but so we can read directly from a database. So if you can read from an API, you can read from spreadsheets as well, or text files. So a common operation is like, hey, I have a comma delimited text file. I have an Excel spreadsheet. I want to work with that data. In our case, we have a CSV file that we want to read, and you can either pass a file name in here, or you can actually give it the URL of something, which is really cool because you don't have to pull anything down to your page. So I'm going to cut and paste this entire line, and then I'll just explain what it means. Actually, if one of the helpers wouldn't mind, or no, actually, let me just try this. I don't know, my Etherpad was crashing, so let me just make sure that I can get this in here. So this will just go out to the web, grab a, and I'm posting this on line 395 in the Etherpad. And the format is, it's a little hard to read because this line goes on forever, but let me just, so it's the variable that we're already familiar with that we want to create, the assignment operator, read.csv, which is different from a variable read.csv. So this is why I don't like that dot notation, is because it's, you know, this is completely separate from the variables we were seeing with dot otherwise. So, and as the argument, you give it the location of a file. So in this case, it's an actual URL that we're going to reach out and grab. And then there's a variety of different arguments. And so we talked briefly about different data types. And I mentioned one of those was factors, which is treating, essentially encoding a character string as a category. And just to make things easier for this particular exercise, we have another snippet that is saying don't treat strings as factors in this case. So, but how would I know to type that? You would know just from working with your data if it was needed or not. So, for purposes of this, we can just ignore why we're using that. So the first thing I do is usually run that, and I see I didn't get an error, so that's one good news. Oops, I deleted that. And usually what I like to do is, okay, let's just take a look. Do we have this here? Gap wide. So I do have data in the data frame that I created. So that's correct. And then str gives us just like a quick look about our data. So we can take a look at this and we see, okay, we have 142 observations, so 142 rows, and there's 38 variables, which is columns. And it gives us some samples. And then this is what we talked a little bit about was it, since we're reading this in from a CSV, which is all characters, it takes, R looks at this and takes a best guess at what it thinks it is. So in this case, it got them all right. So it saw, these are those in continent and country are characters. These are numbers. These are integers, so the difference number has actually a floating point, so it's a decimal, as well as an integer where it's a whole number. So maybe we, and then if we take a look at this, maybe it would, so in the case just of this, looking at this, maybe we want to swap this table and pivot it. So maybe we want to have each of the countries have their own column, essentially, and then have GDP listed as a row underneath each of these. So there's no particular reason you'd want, you necessarily want to do this or don't want to do this. It just depends on your data operations. Maybe it's easier or it makes more sense for you to present the data in a certain way. And there's I'll show so the way we can do that is to use a similar philosophy that we've done before, that we talked about before. So I'm just going to clear up my window here. So I have a gap wide. I'll move this down here. So we have a gap underscore wide, and we can create a new. So let's pivot that based on certain columns. So we'll turn it into maybe a long format rather than ours. It's kind of a hybrid. We have sort of a wide format, but we'll tweak it a little bit. So we're going to create a new data frame. We'll have an assignment operator. We have the data frame that we want to work with. So we define that as gap wide. And we'll hit shift command enter to define our pipe command. And we want to send that to something called pivot underscore longer. And this takes a few different arguments. So one we have is the column names that we want to pivot, or we want to, so we could, that's defined as cols equal. So we want to set this to a value. This is, we're not comparing these, so it's not double equals, it's a single value. And this takes a vector of values. So we saw earlier how to do that. And it's with the C operation. And we saw this with select, and we actually did this in my breakout room. There was a question. So we've seen working with select, we type select, and then we type the column name. You know, select life expectancy, select year. So what happens if we have hundreds of columns in a data set? That would be pretty onerous to type in each of those. So there's some wildcard operations and some ways that you can slice and dice and grab chunks of column names. Similar to a filter, but not the same thing. A filter works on rows, and the operations that we'll look at are going to work on the column names themselves. So one of those is starts with. So maybe we want to, we see, we have a bunch, these are column names that we had looked these. I'm pointing to pop underscore 1952, pop underscore in our current data set, but we want to make those rows. So we want to pivot those. So instead of typing in each of these, we can actually type starts with pop. And this, I guess best practices is to have single quotes with these. And then since C is a vector, you can place multiple values in here. So I want to grab all those that starts with pop, all those columns that start with pop. I also want to grab those that start with life expectancy. So we have a bunch of these as well. So rather than typing each of those. And then let's grab GDP per cap as well. So starts with GDP. Oops. Make sure this matches. So, and this is important, like it helps to have an editor, because after you start to have a lot of parens and brackets, you forget where these close. So this was pivots longer, takes a few different arguments. One is columns, cols equal. Another one is names to. So what we want to pivot these names to. So we'll have observations type per year, and this this is not matching anything. This is in our new data frame, what we're going to pivot to, and what we want to change the values to. So, so in other words, the names of these columns, how do we want to represent those in a pivoted table? And then how do we want to represent the values? So we'll do observed values. And we can run this. Okay, and the so typically, so I got an error in pivot longer, could not find function pivot longer. Typically when you see that, it means that you did not import a library, or you forgot to import a library. So I'm just gonna double check what I need, and I did forget to do something. So yours won't work either on this, so my apologies. So this is a typical, so there is another, so we saw importing a library, we used dplyr, we used gapminder, and earlier we used ggplot. So there's an additional one that we need for this that is called tidyr. And that has the function pivot longer in here. So now I realize, so this, my code here, I'm just sort of slamming, this is a bit of a mess. You know, I'm just having there's not, and this is perfect for a scratch pad, which I'm just, showing here, but Tim will talk about this later. So there's sort of like a best practices for organizing your R code, having comments. So usually you have the libraries up at the top of your code. You have some explanations with that. And so this is not I would not recommend just slamming all this together. Someone has to read your code, but for purposes of demonstration, this is fine. So I'm going to highlight this, run this. It didn't complain. So we have our tidy R library. And so now this should run. We didn't get the error anymore, so it did find this library. And then let's take a peek at what this looks like now. So we know that we can look at data frames using view. So we'll do gap _ long, and I'll run this. And then I'll show sort of the difference between these two. So let me close these. So just to recap, this was our original data frame. So we can see this is sort of a wide table format. So we have each of these values were in, each of these year values were in their own column, which depending on how you want to do it, could be kind of clunky, depending on how you're looking at things. So maybe you want to pivot this and have everything sort of like name value pairs. And that's what we have here. So we pivoted this to where we have now, we have the continent, country, and we chose the columns that we want to turn into observation year, and we chose what we want to name the values. So let's double check one here. So Africa, Algeria, population 932. It's just to make sure that these are the same. So 2449 and 9. So that does not seem right to me. Oh, starts with life expectancy. Well, am I missing? That's odd. Let me see here. I'm just making sure that these match up. So let me see. Africa, Algeria. Oh, this is not. I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong value for this. So to double check myself, population 1952, I'm going to look in here. I was looking at the GDP. So Africa, Algeria, let's look for population 1952 in here. And 9279, and this is a 9279. So these do match up. So this is just an example of how you could take data to pivot between those. I think maybe what we'll do is I'll write up some stuff and maybe we can kick off the next session with an exercise, just it would be helpful to recap some of this. But it really is a little bit long-winded, but the takeaway of this is if you have data, you have a little more flexibility than something like Excel, where you can pick apart certain pieces that you want to pivot and transform those. So we didn't get all the way through this second lesson, but I wanted to stop for questions that there were, and also we wanted to leave 15 minutes at the end for you guys to fill out some feedback for us that we can adjust for the next session. It's like too fast, too slow. I'm more interested in this. More exercises, less exercises. So
thank you so much, Christian.
Yeah, that'll conclude this portion of it. Apologies if we didn't get too much into the pivot stuff, but actually that is less cool than the other things. You'll use the other stuff that Jamie had talked about much more often, in my experience. So with that, I'll just open it up to any just general questions folks have. And then Lee, if you want to send out the link to our feedback or just point out where they can find that.
Yeah, so the form is the same and it's on the Ethernet pad or Etherpad. And I also added it here. Even though it said like day one, the link it still goes to the same survey. So thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And even though we didn't get to the last challenges, if you have time, maybe you can go over those on your own, and then during the next session, we could like go over them or yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lee. So what we'll do at the next one, and we'll keep it, we'll keep it shorter, maybe like to 10 to 15 minutes. We'll go through the last exercises more quickly for the pivot tables when we start the next lesson, which is Lee on data visualization. Is that right?
Yeah, next week's on data visualization.
Cool. So next week, then now we start getting into, so these are sort of building blocks. So the pieces are like, okay, I know how to pick at, filter, get data. And then we're going to spend a whole session, Lee will explain everything in ggplot, all those sort of arcane things, and what's this thing after the tilde, the plus sign. Lee's going to decryptify all that for you guys. So we'll get into some of that.
So we have some questions. One is there a link to these recordings so we can reference them later? And then another from Miriam, can you please share the code? We can put the code on the Etherpad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jamie.
I'll put that on there now. So
I'm
going to
gonna
just
find a place to stash the recordings, and we'll get that to you next. We'll mail that to you.
And then once the recordings are ready, then you'll get an email about them. So I'll just put that in the chat too.
Okay. I guess I'm gonna stop the recording for today now, or do you want to? If there's more.
Yeah,
questions?
that's fine. Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm going to just copy and paste this whole chunk over into the Etherpad.